Okay. I hope this is working, but we'll see. So bear with me for just a second. Oh, and it looks like we're on. So good. I think I have everybody on here. So welcome if you're joining. It's 6:01. And so I think we'll just go ahead and get started and welcome. Thank you everyone for joining. I appreciate the support that I've gotten. So hopefully this is working okay on everyone's end. I do have a friend, Carly, if you're watching, make sure to text me if something's not working like it's supposed to, or if somebody's in the chat. Oh, there's Tanya. She says, hey, so I must be working okay. So awesome. Well, so today, before I get started, I just want to introduce myself to anyone who may not know who I am. I know several of you do know who I am. My name is Lindsay Venn. I am a PA and a dietitian, as well as a metabolic health practitioner who's really just trying to help more people out there understand what they can do in order to improve their health and hopefully get a little bit of weight loss along the way. And so my information will be throughout this presentation. You'll find it. Yay, I'm getting lots of highs. So if you have any questions or whatnot, my information will be available and you can reach out directly. So let me share my screen. As most of you know, I like to do PowerPoint presentations in order to make my message a little bit more clear. So let me share this. And please, we will have time for Q&A at the end. So please, any questions that you might have, please feel free to put them in the chat. I'm not going to respond to those until we get done with the presentation, and then I'll go to the questions. So anyway, so first, the most important piece, I think, in all the teaching that I've done over the years is having people understand that if you don't know why you're gaining weight, you're not going to understand why you're not losing weight. And so we have to figure out, what is the cause of weight gain? What have we been taught all of these years that may have been poor information? And what can we do about it in order to improve our knowledge when it comes to our weight? So first of all, of course, this is not personalized medical advice. I am not your doctor. This is just generalized advice that most people can take into account when it comes to what they can do that's perfectly safe in order to improve their metabolic health and, again, their weight. So first, the first piece is understanding. Like I said, if you don't understand what causes weight gain, how are you going to be able to lose? And the sad part is everything we've been taught, myself especially, because I went through dietitian school and I went through medical school. I was a personal trainer at one point. I was taught all the wrong things, which I'm sure you were too. So the CICO, or calories in versus calories out, has always been the mantra. If you go to your doctor and they want you to lose weight and you say, sure, doc, how do I do that? They're going to say, eat less and move more. And my image here kind of reflects that what they say is the problem is that you are eating more food and you're moving less. And that is why you've put on this weight that you don't want. And now we just have to reverse that process. So what should work? You use a lot of willpower. You follow a very low calorie diet. You use a lot more willpower, and you go out and you exercise and you do all the activity they recommend, and you should lose weight, right? And the nice thing is for a lot of people, this works right at the beginning, but it doesn't work so well at the end. They will lose the weight and then it will come back on, and they have found that it is so much harder to keep the weight off when following this model. And so maintenance is nearly impossible following a calories in, calories out model. So here's the reality of the situation. And I like this image. Again, you use willpower, you get out there and you exercise, you follow a low calorie diet. And what is really the end result? It is this poor guy over here in the corner. I guess I can get my pen out, that really talks about, oh, and hopefully that's better, that really talks about the fact that people are just tired and they're hungry, their energy level's miserable, and the scale's not moving. So, and then who gets blamed for it? You go to your doctor, you use willpower as much as you can, you're eating less, you're exercising more, you're not losing weight. Who's the doctor going to blame? He's going to blame you. And they're going to say, oh, you must not be doing what I said, even though you're making all the right efforts based on their advice. So again, where is this advice coming from? Remember who you're listening to. Your doctor or your provider is definitely giving this eat less, move more information. Personal trainers do that. They have you count calories expended at the gym versus calories that you're putting in your mouth. The big conglomerates out there have all utilized this. Weight Watchers counting points, Jenny Craig, Nutrisystem, they're all feeding you these low calorie options which is just going to make you hungry and make this that much more difficult in the long run. And so you do hear it, you get inundated with it everywhere you go. And again, I really consider this to be terrible advice. The new piece that's out there that I put on my slide was, oh, is this just that you have a GLP-1 deficiency? Is this what's caused weight gain? And I would challenge it with, we didn't have GLP-1 deficiencies 50 years ago. Why would we have a GLP-1 deficiency now? And so you can consider this, but it's certainly something that isn't the cause of the weight gain we've seen over the last 50 years. And I love this slide. Insanity. It's doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. That's why I'm trying. My number one objective here tonight is to convince you that calories in versus calories out does not work. Stop trying that strategy. We're going to teach you why you need to try a different strategy. So what I realized after I've been a dietitian for almost 30 years is that I was wrong. And you're not going to find many medical people out there or personal trainers or whatnot who are going to say, oh, I gave you bad advice. Maybe you need to try something different. I've come to that realization. Many people out there have come to that realization. We now try to get to the root cause of the problem. And that is what is actually causing your weight gain, your insulin resistance, the other things that come along with it, such as chronic disease, your high blood pressure, high cholesterol, et cetera. So let's get to the root problem and figure it out. So just some evidence in case you need more evidence. Like I said, my number one objective is to convince you, and that's usually the hardest part of my job, is to convince you that the direction we're going is not good, and the advice has generated that direction. And so as you can see, America is fatter than ever. This is comparing young people and older people. And the trend overall, you have one line that's going down. This line right here is the only one that's going down, and that is overweight status. And that's because the obesity and the extreme overweight, the extreme obesity are actually going up. So we're just replacing overweight people with obese people, making that overweight number come down. It's not that people are getting thinner in general. So why do we teach this? That's what we were taught. As you all know, that's what I learned in medical school and dietitian school. It's what I learned when my personal trainer certification. And it's what the FDA has pushed for decades now, eat less, move more. We've followed their advice and we've created a bunch of failure. So we want to make sure we're making a change. So why did this happen? And for those of you who have heard me talk about this before, forgive me, we're going to do a little history lesson. But for those of you who have not heard this before and you want to know where this came from, this is where. And so back in 1955, Dwight Eisenhower, president at the time, had a heart attack. And heart attacks were so rare that everybody freaked out and was like, okay, what caused this? Well, Dwight Eisenhower, little did most people know that he was a 4-pack per day smoker. So that, of course, wasn't evaluated in the potential cause of his heart attack, but he also loved his cheeseburgers. And so the cheeseburgers were the thing that got scrutinized the most. And they particularly got scrutinized by this gentleman. His name was Ansel Keys. He was a scientist. He was not a doctor. He was a physiologist, to be exact. And he decided he wanted to figure this out. And so he started a study, excuse me, called the 7 Countries Study, where he went out and evaluated, and this is the important piece, he actually evaluated 21 different countries and gathered all their data. How much fat are they eating? What kinds of fat are they eating? What does their diet look like? And how much heart attack are they seeing in those countries? But the downside is that he cherry picked those 21 countries and reduced it down to 7. And he did this to make his hypothesis seem accurate. In science, when people are doing research on different things, they generate a hypothesis, and then the job of the research is to prove the hypothesis right or wrong. Well, when you cherry pick out your data, you can make your hypothesis correct by doing that kind of thing. And so he narrowed it down to 20 or to 7 different countries and did find that there was this conclusion that he drew was that saturated fat intake led to heart disease and to death from heart disease. So therefore, what we need to do is get rid of the saturated fat. Will lower your risk of heart disease and death from this. And of course, the smoking piece was ignored, which was a very much a disservice to what we were trying to do. So again, he turned his hypothesis into a conclusion that shouldn't necessarily have been the conclusion that was drawn from it. Those other, 14 countries that he didn't include in his final research very much pointed in the opposite direction of where he went with it. So where did it lead to? Well, we've all seen this lovely image, the food guide pyramid, and that's what the FDA bases all of their recommendations on, is very inaccurate. And many of us out there have said, flip that food guide pyramid upside down and we'd be doing a lot better when it comes to our weight. So they want you to have these 6 to 11 servings of carbohydrates, particularly from whole healthy grains. They want you to have a lot of fruit and vegetables, of course, limit the amount of meat and poultry, particularly red meat, and make sure that you're keeping your saturated fat intake down, less than 10% of your total fat intake. So it was quite a bit of a disservice, as we can see, because what happened to the rates of overweight and obesity in the United States once these guidelines were implemented in the early 1980s? Our levels of obesity and overweight have just skyrocketed, and they continue to skyrocket as time goes on, like I showed in those other slides. So hopefully I'm doing a good job of convincing you. So there was one study that I like to point out here that was actually done in 2017. So almost 20 years ago, there was a study completed with a very large population of people. It was 135,000 people that they followed for 7 years. And they did show that high carbohydrate intake had a higher risk of total mortality, and that the total fat intake in individual types of fat were related to lower total mortality. So putting us all on a high carbohydrate, low fat diet increased the rate of death and risk of death from all causes. So it was unfortunately a very big disservice. The very last line here, I love to quote, the global dietary guidelines should be reconsidered in light of these findings. And finally, actually, they are starting to reevaluate these now. So we're very appreciative of that. Dr. Ben Bickman, as you all know, I work with over at Insulin IQ. He's actually part of that committee that's reworking these dietary guidelines. And hopefully we'll see a much stronger shift in the right direction as we change things. Oops. Sorry, I lost you here for a second. Let me reshare that. 2 seconds. I think there's a timing set on my presentation, unfortunately. Or not. Let me try this one more time here. Sorry, guys. All right, here we go. So hopefully you're all staying with me so far. Like I said, it's a little bit of a history lesson and a science lesson, but one that I think is worth the time. So next on here, let me hit the play button again and make it bigger. Next on here is, what was I teaching as a dietitian, and what do dietitians today, still today, most dietitians, we have a few rogue dietitians in the group, but most dietitians are still teaching the principles that you've heard over and over again. Things like breakfast is the most important meal of the day. You cannot skip breakfast. You have to eat small, frequent meals, otherwise you'll slow down your metabolism. You have to eat less and move more. All calories are equal. Whole grains should be the majority of your diet. The fruits and vegetables I mentioned, avoid foods high in fat, and that losing more than 2 pounds in a week is unhealthy, and skipping meals is going to slower your metabolism by putting you into starvation mode. Now, I'm hoping to debunk all of this for y'all and encourage you to follow about the exact opposite when it comes to that advice. And again, just another image that shows that that advice was not helpful at all. The other piece I like to prove and show here, and I get these questions, well, what else could it be? You know, all these people couldn't have been giving us bad advice, or maybe people weren't actually following that bad advice. Well, this study was done. Nina Teicholz put this out a couple of years ago, and it really did show that the consumption of things like red meat, whole milk, eggs, animal fats have been decreased by the population, and that things like fresh fruits and vegetables and grains, as you can see here, have all gone up. So the studies do show that people are following the advice. It's just that the advice was wrong. The other piece is the activity piece. Well, what if people are moving less? What if we're more sedentary than we were before? Maybe that's the problem that we've got with this calories in versus calories out. Well, this study did show, and this was a while ago, it was back in 2016, that actually there is a 13% increase in exercise over those years compared to a decrease. So it's not that we're moving less. People have made exercise a priority, which we're appreciative of, but it's not a lack of exercise that has led to this overweight and obesity epidemic. The other one I get, the other comment is, well, it's because people are living longer. Of course, there's more overweight and obesity. Of course, there's more chronic disease. These people are living a lot longer, so we're seeing more of it. Well, that's not true. We're not seeing chronic disease that's starting in the 70s and 80s. or 70 and 80-year-olds, we're seeing it in our young people now. Children are starting to develop these chronic diseases, type 2 diabetes, high blood pressure, fatty liver, you name it. And so it is certainly not a fact that we're living longer that's the problem. It really has nothing to do with the overweight and obesity epidemic at all. In this other study, I know many of you guys have seen me cite this before. This was done just a few years ago. When they looked at metabolic health markers in Americans, they found that 88% of people had some level of metabolic sickness, and only 12% of us actually were metabolically well. And that's looking at all kinds of things like cholesterol and blood pressure, insulin levels, A1Cs, things like that. So we definitely have a bad problem when it comes to the number of people who are unhealthy in the US. And so why isn't our advice working? Well, look what we've replaced all those high-fat foods with. I know many of you remember SnackWells and different things like that, where we said, oh, but they're fat-free. I can eat as many of those as I want. We didn't take into consideration the sugar content or the margarine replacing butter problem with all the seed oils. We really did a bad job of substituting whole natural food like steak for things like veggie burgers and SnackWells. And so this is a good reason why. The other piece is look at how processed all this stuff is. You know, processed foods are literally the enemy when it comes to your health. And so all of these things that we over processed in an effort to eliminate the fat really sent us in a much stronger trajectory in the wrong direction. So let's go back to the beginning, back to what we talked about. What are the current thoughts in the US when it comes to overweight and obesity? It's that we have no willpower, we're making bad choices, we're not exercising enough, and that led to it. But my suggestion, and a lot of people's suggestion, is this hormonal model of obesity. The hormonal model of obesity takes into fact that there's this thing called hyperinsulinemia. And this, for those of you who don't like the long medical terms, this means you're making too much insulin. If you have too much insulin in the body, it will lead to this phenomenon where you're hungry all the time. You're hungry, you're tired, you get that slump right after you've eaten, and therefore you're going to eat more. And so hyperinsulinemia, this is the new theory, or the new, I would tell you in my practice, has certainly been proven out, that too much insulin leads to too much food because we're tired and we're hungry all the time. And that in itself is going to lead to the overweight and obesity. And so if you were to turn this around and go the other direction, well, let's get to the root cause of the problem and let's get rid of this hyperinsulinemia problem. And that's actually fairly easy to do with some interventions that we're going to talk about. So this study I love too, and this one was published in 1941. That tells you how long ago that we recognized this as a problem. But in 1941, this quote was that the current energy theory of obesity, which considers only an imbalance between intake of food and expenditure of energy, is unsatisfactory. An increased appetite with a subsequent imbalance intake and output of energy is the consequence, and that's the important word right there. That is the consequent of abnormal fat tissue, and that is all derived from too much insulin, rather than that being the actual cause. And so we really need to look at that insulin problem, the abnormal fat tissue that results from the insulin problem, being the thing that leads to an increased appetite and imbalance in what we do. So, and there's one more image. We do know better. People with low insulin, people with type 1 diabetes, and I have this image here of this girl. You know, we knew back in the day when someone came in and they were losing weight, and they were starving all the time, they were tested for type 1 diabetes because that was the likely cause. Type 1 diabetes is no insulin, or very, very low insulin. So they can't store fat because they don't have any insulin to help this storage mechanism occur. Today, unfortunately, we see far more of this where there's just way too much insulin, and we have this just over exaggerated fat storage going on from that hyperinsulinemia. And again, always follow the money. This is where it all comes from. So this was quick. It was fast and easy. I did want to leave time for Q&A for anybody who wanted to have it. And I did want to talk about what the rest of the week entails. So first, what is insulin resistance and why does it matter? We're going to do a little deeper dive into that. What should an actual proper human diet look like? You know, the human diet shouldn't be all these things that come in boxes and bags with barcodes. They should be coming from natural food sources. Why willpower doesn't work? Are we sabotaging ourselves by trying to use willpower when the advice to eat less, move more, which is just going to make you hungry? You know, if you think about it, and Ben talks about this all the time, If you want to go to an event as hungry as possible so you can eat as much as possible, you're going to eat less and move more prior to that event because you want to generate hunger so you can eat more. It's not the way we want to do it on a day-to-day basis. Why convenience and snacking fail? Frequent eating, having convenience stores, having the snack box at the office or the drawer at your desk full of all kinds of snackies, why that isn't going to work for you and what impact that has on insulin. Learning what small changes you can make and that you can do pretty quickly to have some really good benefit, and then different things that might be sabotaging your efforts. So that's all going to be talked about tomorrow. And then on Wednesday, I'm going to do a whole series on supplements and other tools that can be helpful. So this includes, again, supplements, different nutraceuticals, tracking tools, different, CGM use versus ketone monitoring, things like that, support groups that are available. And then on Thursday, how do you measure all of this in yourself? Do you want to get labs done? Which labs do I recommend? How can you get them very inexpensively through me? And then how do you interpret them? And I don't know if anybody saw my post from before, but next week I'm going to do a small snippet on how to interpret those. So if you do get the labs drawn, you'll have a good video or recording in order to help you evaluate those lab results a little bit better. So anyway, again, thank you everyone for watching. This is where you can find me. You've all obviously found my Facebook page. If you just Google Venn Integrative Medicine, you'll be able to find my website there as well. And yeah, so let me get over to the chat and see what we've got going on for questions and whatnot. If I can scroll down on it. Oh, Jennifer says, I'm a huge part of her 140-pound weight loss. Thank you very much. Jennifer is a wonderful person who has really done a great job as far as incorporating these strategies for huge success. So we love to see that. And of course, it's not letting me pull up the chat except for the ones that are on the screen. So give me a second on my phone to pull that up, and I'll see if there's any questions in the chat there for this, if I can find it. And of course, it's not that easy to find here either. Well, maybe I need to find it otherwise. Thank you guys. I've gotten several little comments as far as thank you for the information on it. I really cannot see the rest of these chat questions. So if you had a question, please re-enter it into the chat just because I can't. Maybe if no, that doesn't work either. Go to my other Facebook. And if anybody's joining on YouTube, I haven't even gone in there and looked to see if there's any chats in there. Let me go in and look there as well. Oops, that's the old one, hopefully. And Carly, if you see any chat questions, please throw them my direction if you've got them. And if anybody's joining on YouTube, I haven't even gone in there and looked to see if there's any chats in there on YouTube. I'll stop that recording. Okay, how often would we need to do labs or check in with you from Renee? Thanks, Renee. I really recommend to have your labs done about every 3 months. If you're really wanting to chase that insulin down, you can do it as often as every 6 weeks. It will change that quickly. And so thankfully that's a quick one, but every 3 months seems to be a really good marker. We'd want you to get things like your insulin levels for sure. A glucose can be helpful if you're not wearing a CGM. And then also a lipid panel. And we'll talk about the lipid panel and how to use that as almost like a poor man's insulin resistance test if you don't have access to get an insulin level done. So good question. And Yvette says she doesn't have any questions, so she's good there. So good. Well, this was a lot quicker than an hour, so that's kind of nice. I can get to dinner a little bit early. I'll stay on here for a couple more minutes in case anybody else has a question and needs to repost it. Sorry, I didn't realize those wouldn't be able to be scrollable. I'm learning this whole new technology piece, and so I appreciate everyone being patient with me. Once we have labs, can you send them to me for review and recommendations? Yes. And so that's going to be part of the Thursday conversation. I have a couple of different ways that we can do that. One, we can just do a simple little consult to review them. I do a quick meet and greet. I think they're $25 that we can often get through everything with that, or do a visit there. to give us a lot more time. So, and then I am going to offer a quote unquote program where if you want to work with me on a weekly or monthly basis, there'll be a condensed, cheaper way to work with me on a regular basis. So awesome. Shannon, thank you. Valuable information. Thanks, Yvette. You guys are such good support. So what about sardines and fasting? What do I think? So hi, Marcio. Um, sardines actually seem to be quite beneficial for those who are struggling to do longer fasts. I do not consider them to break the fast because they are such a high fat source and a good healthy fat source. So for anyone who's struggling with issues when it comes to doing a little bit longer of a fast, sardines are a great thing to add in my opinion. You can't overdo them, and so you have to be a little bit careful, and they can be upsetting onto the stomach because of the fat content. But otherwise, I think they're not a bad idea. From Renee, do I work with insurances such as Impact Health? For my visits, unfortunately, I'm not set up to bill insurance. I can create notes that you can submit to your insurance for reimbursement. And so that's an option that has worked for a lot of people. But the insurance piece will apply to labs, for example, if you wanted to order labs through your insurance, or if we needed to prescribe a medication or something. In order to do that, you do have to be established with me as a patient just for legal reasons. But yeah, insurance can be utilized for everything except the visit. So good questions. Hi, Melissa. Thank you for the compliment. Say, I know this was pretty basic. I know some of you are way more into this than others. And so I did want to keep it basic. Ellen says, what do you recommend if you're doing all the right things, but the weight doesn't change? You need to make sure to join tomorrow and Wednesday. We actually do dive deep into that because there's so much more involved in weight than just insulin. Anybody who goes to my website will see a Venn diagram that does show that hormones can play a role, vitamin D can play a really big role. Thyroid health can play a big role. Liver function is another one that I've started doing a lot more liver supplementation for people who are really stuck. To just really clean up that liver with some supplements such as milk thistle can really kind of get you through that plateau phase when you're doing all the right things. So hopefully that helps, Ellen. And I have a full script store that if anybody wants me to send them like specific supplement recommendations, you can just email me at lindsay@venintegrativemedicine.com and I can connect you with that store for things like the recommended liver support or the vitamin D, like I mentioned. Though the next 2 days, like I said, we're going to go into those in a lot deeper dive. So hopefully you can join. I am recording these, so if you couldn't join, you're always welcome to reach out again to my email and I can send you a copy of the recording. They should be recorded on YouTube as well. And so you can certainly go visit my YouTube page to find it there. So yes, Linda, you should be able to rewatch this. Again, go to YouTube. If you can't find it there, let me know. Chrissy, you're welcome. And Shannon's absolutely correct. You know, we'll talk about it tomorrow. The 3 primary causes of insulin resistance, number 1, your diet. So that's a big lever that you have a lot of control over. So we focus on that. But 2 other big causes are stress and inflammation. And so if your stress is poorly managed, if you have an inflammation condition like autoimmune disease, Hashimoto's, or if you have just some kind of pain that you can't get rid of, whether you have a knee injury or a low back injury, trying to get those under control because those 2 other factors will drive insulin higher, making weight loss that much harder. So thank you, Shannon, for the good point. So yay. I appreciate all of the collaboration or all of the input from you guys. Participation, that's the word I was looking for. So really appreciate it, you guys. So awesome. Well, I'll go ahead and log off unless there's any just last minute questions you want to throw in the chat. And then otherwise, hopefully you all can join tomorrow. It'll be the same time. Hopefully the technology works like it did tonight. I lucked out because it was a really long day. So, so awesome. So yeah, I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to end this and then we will do